Hello, everyone. Pastor George here with today's Bible study recap. And today in Bible study, we looked at Luke 14. So, the reason I chose Luke 14 is because it's full of a lot of unique material. And what I mean by unique material, I mean some ideas and concepts are repeated in other Gospels, but the ordering and the way that Jesus is talking about these things is very different here in Luke than it is in other places. So, each of the Gospels has unique material. I mean, John is pretty much entirely unique. Matthew and Luke both have large sections of unique teaching. And so, and Mark also has some unique parts to it. And so, all of that is to say is that, that's showing the gospel writers highlighting certain parts of Jesus's ministry and message. So, in Luke 14, we have Jesus in the house of a ruler of the Pharisees. What that means is probably a high-ranking leader amongst them or someone who's prominent in a local synagogue. And so Jesus is there. He's in this guy's house, and while he's there, it's on the Sabbath, and he heals a man who has dropsy or edema. It's that buildup of fluid in your body. And they have a conversation about what's lawful to do on the Sabbath. You'll remember that the Pharisees are very strict about what's okay to do on the Sabbath. And so Jesus rebukes that, and he heals this guy. And he uses that as an opportunity to talk about what the Sabbath's purpose is. And you'll see here, in this, you'll see the themes of Luke, which I talked about on Sunday, right? That care for the outcasts that Luke is so worried with. And you see that not only in the healing of this guy, and this is the only healing story that we have of this person in all of the Gospels. And then you have three parables, some of which are kind of close to other parables that Jesus gives in other places, but all of them are pretty uniquely targeted. So he actually targets this as different people. So the first person he talks to is the host, or the guest, excuse me. He talks to the guest first, and he does the parable of the wedding feast. And in this, he talks about the purpose of humility. Right? What should we, as people who follow God, desire? We shouldn't desire to be like the people who are at the wedding feast with the prominent positions. Instead, we should desire to take humble places at the table and then be invited forward, because how much more honoring is that, right? Jesus is trying to communicate a heart position of desiring to be humble. That's the first thing he does. So then, when he's there, right, he then talks to the Pharisee and gives another banquet. This is the guy who invited him. This is another parable, this time about the great banquet. And this is teaching about who should be invited. And this is where you see Luke's themes come up big time, right? He says, when you give a feast, invite poor, invite the crippled, invite the lame and the blind, and you will be blessed because they cannot repay you, right? There's in a lot of cultures around the world, there is this idea that, I've done something for you, now you owe me. And that's true in the United States. That's true in other cultures that I've interacted with, right? And Jesus is saying that is not the way that we are supposed to carry ourselves at all when it comes to engaging with other people. It's not about you owing me this, or I do this, so then you do it, and it's a way of being prideful. No, it's like, invite people who can't pay you back. That way you know your heart is actually doing it from the right place, right? And then he has a final parable for them, because one of the people at the table, and I don't know what the purpose of this guy is, if he's trying to, just be pious, or if he's trying to get in well with Jesus or whatever, right? But he says, blessed is everyone who will eat the kingdom of God, one of the guests, right? And then Jesus responds to that, and he gives another parable, right? And this time it's the parable of the great banquet. And this bears a similarity to a parable in Matthew, but the point is very different. So it's this idea that this guy's throwing a great banquet, and he goes out and he wants to invite everyone, and he invites people, and they begin making excuses why they can't come. And then he goes out to everyone, invites everyone in, right? And there's still room, which is interesting. You'll notice who's invited in, right? It's the people who do not have a lot. And then he sends them to everywhere, right? And that, I think, is maybe Luke's, Jesus is emphasized that this is even going to go to Gentiles, because now they're just going to people on the roads and the highways and the hedges, right? They're taking anyone who will come in. compel them to come in. And then it ends with this final thing that says, none of the men who were invited shall taste my banquet, referring to the first people that were invited. Now, Matthew gives a very similar teaching of Jesus, but it comes later in his gospel. It comes during that final section where Jesus is in Jerusalem. He's preaching against the Pharisees and the religious leaders. And it's very targeted against them. And it even has this whole thing where the guy shows up without the proper clothes. And he says, why are you wearing this? Bind him hand and foot and throw him into outer darkness where there's weeping and gnashing of teeth, right? Luke's version doesn't have that because while Jesus would use these stories, right, he uses them for different purposes. Here he's using this as a way of describing the work that he's doing and who should be invited in. And it's everyone, right? People who are outcasts should be invited in. He's expanding the scope of what people think God's kingdom is. And then our section ends with the cost of discipleship, and this is also a unique part of Luke. Sometimes I see this as just being just part of all the Gospels, but it isn't. It's actually found here in Luke. There are sayings, right? Take up your cross and follow me. If salt has lost its saltiness, like these occur in the other Gospels, but the large section that mainly makes it up is unique to the Gospel of Luke. And so Luke 14 shows us a really good example of like what Luke wants us to know about Jesus's ministry and who Jesus says he is, and like what that means for you when you follow him, right? And he says, if you're going to follow me, count the cost. Know the difficulty that this journey will bring, because this kingdom of God isn't for comfortability. It's for the truth and who God really is. And so that's Jesus in the Gospel of Luke, right? And he says, if you can't make it, then get out of the way, basically, right? So yeah, I thought this was a good way, if you wanted to do one chapter, kind of a focus on what Jesus cares about, what he's about, what he is here to do, but also who he wants people to understand are included as part of his kingdom. Luke 14 is a great place to start. So that's what we talked about today. I hope you find that interesting. I'll see you on Sunday for worship. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your Wednesday, and peace out.